Hi everybody, it's Courtney, and today we're going to be making 3 very simple cards using the Jumbo Poinsettia Maker Stencil by Simon Hurley Create. So I'm going to show you 3 different ways to do a little bit of shading with this stencil. So for the first one, we're going to be just using some inks. So I'm going to lay down my stencil onto a panel of the Stark White cardstock, also by Simon Hurley, and I'm using some Post-it note tape to kind of mask off the images that are somewhat close to my poinsettia because I don't trust myself. And first I'm going to go in with Rosy Cheeks, which is a pink, and I'm going in with a very, very light hand just to add a little bit of color to the flower. Next, I'm going to go in with the Bee Sting, which is a true red. And I started with one blending brush and I wasn't able to get into those little details. So I ended up bringing in the little teeny tiny ones that come in the makeup brush sets. And I'm just adding a little bit of this ink right where the shadows would be. So mainly where one petal is coming out from another. There is a little bit of a white, or there will be, once I remove the stencil, there will be a little bit of a white gap in between each one of the petals and each one of the leaves. So they wouldn't necessarily be a really intense shadow, I guess you could say, but I just wanted a little bit of variation of the color. So I'm just kind of dabbing on that ink a little bit, and then I'm going to go back to the lighter color, the pink color, and I'm going to blend over the entire area. Now we've already gone in with a light hand, so we already kind of have a base, a little bit of that color. So we don't really have to add too much more to get these 2 colors to blend. So I'm just going to kind of go over the whole thing, and I'm adding just a little bit of ink at a time. I can always add more. I can never take it away. And once I am happy with the results, then I can remove my mask and we'll move on to the green leaves of the poinsettia. So like I said, this is a layering stencil. So these line up pretty easily. There's really only one way for them to go, so it's pretty impossible to mess it up. So I'm going to remove all this Post-it note tape and kind of shift this around until I find the right spot where this is supposed to be. And there's going to be 1 leaf on one side and 2 on the other, and you only have to lay down your stencil 1 time for them both to fit, or both of them to be lined up. And like I said, there's going to be a little bit of a white gap in between the leaves and the petals too, just like there were with the actual poinsettia. So I'm going to do the same thing, just lining up some of that Post-it note tape to cover up some of the other areas. And I'm going to start off with the later gator is the color I'm using. And I'm just going to do a light layer of this, just like I did with the reds. Then I can go in with my tiny little ink blending brush and just add a little bit of a shadow, again, where these are kind of tucked behind the petals, and also where one is tucked behind the other, just adding a little bit of that darker ink, and then going back in with the later gator to kind of blend that out a little bit. Now, when I did remove the stencil, I didn't use enough Post-it note tape, and I did have a few smudges here and there, but we will fix that up, or at least cover that up later. Now for the center of the poinsettia, I'm just going to use one color. I'm going to use Slippery When Wet. This one I had a little bit of trouble. I had to twist and turn this several times, and once I thought I had it lined up, grabbed my ink and my little mini ink blending brush, I realized, no, it's not lined up. So I kind of had to twist and turn it a few more times until I found the right spot and just added a little bit of that color in the middle. So once this one is done, which is the first way that you can add some shading to your stenciled image is with inks, we are also going to be using 2 other mediums, but I want to actually have kind of like a base color for each one of these. So I'm going to take out 2 more panels of the Stark White cardstock, and I'm going to do these the same exact way. So I'm going to go ahead and place down my stencil, use some more Post-it note tape to kind of cover up all of those images surrounding my poinsettia. But this time, instead of using multiple colors, I'm only going to be using the lighter color for both the petals and the leaves. So I'm going to go in with the Rosy Cheeks, go in with a pretty, well, I don't want to say a super light hand, but I want to be able to see where my color is, where my petals are, and no shading, just kind of leaving it just like that. Gonna go ahead and line it up on the next panel and do the same exact thing. And then kind of rotate my stencil around a few times, make sure that my leaves are where they need to be, and just add a little bit of that later gator to the leaves. So once that's done, we have our two panels that we're actually going to bring in a coloring medium for to add our shading and to add our dimension. So you can see that everything is fairly light. It's a light pink, it's a light green, but once we're done with it, it won't be. So first one, I am going to bring in my Copic markers, of course. And I am going to start with the greens. I'm going to start with the leaves, and I'm going to go right in with my darkest color because I already have a base color down, so I'm not too worried about the blending being perfect. So I'm going to lay this down just where my darkest areas will be. So pretty much where this leaf is hanging behind the petals. Flick that out a little bit, blend that out with the two mid-tone colors. And I was only going to use 3 colors, but you want your last color to be just a teeny tiny bit darker than your ink color so that it kind of fades into itself. I'm still leaving the tips of the tip of this leaf, the ink color. For this second one, I'm going to add my shading just a little bit different just because the leaf is shaped different. It's kind of turned to the side. So I'm going to add a little bit of shading to the tip of the leaf for just this one. But I'm going to do the same thing, just blend it out a little bit each time and end with that G12, which is just a smidge darker than the ink color itself. So it will kind of just fade into itself. Did the other leaf the same way, and then we'll move on to the reds. Now this color combination is one that I have been using throughout my Christmas card series. So this is going to be very familiar to you, but I am going to do this the same exact way as I did with the leaves, just adding a little bit of that darker color to the base of the petal, kind of working my way up. Now my normal combination ends with the R22. Typically that's my highlight color, but it's just a little bit too dark for my ink color. So I ended up bringing in an R20, and that kind of fades into that ink color just a little bit better. I'm going to go ahead and show you one more leaf, which is obviously a lot bigger than this first one. So I like to outline the bottom portion of the petal. It kind of gives me a guide as far as where I need to start my flicking. For me, that's just a little bit easier, but do whatever works for you. I'm going to go ahead and flick that out with the R46, R24, R22, and once again, finish off with the R20 and kind of just blend that out, blend that into the ink color. So I went ahead and finished up this entire image, and for the third card, we're going to be using some colored pencils. And I'm really not doing this too different than what I did with the Copics, but I am going to show you just one petal just so that you can get an idea. Now, being this is the first petal that I'm coloring, I went very light-handed. I typically go pretty light-handed with my pencils anyway, but this one is super light-handed because I really wasn't sure how far I was going to have to blend up the petal. So I started with the darkest one, like I did with the markers, and I kind of just added a little bit of shading with each one of the colors as I worked my way up. Now my lightest color is going to be a pink, and it's going to be just a tad bit darker than the ink color itself. And you can see that I'm really not adding a whole lot of shading here. There's really not a whole lot of color being added here, and I felt like it just didn't go far enough up the petal. It was mainly left pink. So because I went in with such a light hand, I was able to go back and extend my shading up a little bit further. So you can see that I am using the lightest color now, and I'm pretty much, that's what I'm left with. Too light for me. So I'm going to go back in with that darkest color, and now I'm just going to add a little bit more pressure. I'm not pressing too hard, but just a little bit more pressure than I did before. And I'm just going to work my way up a little bit farther with each color than I did the first time. Now, when I get to the lightest color, once I have it blended out with the previous color that I used, you'll see that I'm holding the pencil really far up, and that is so that I can barely touch the paper. And I want this to blend with the ink color, so you want to add basically no pressure at all until it blends nicely with the background. So I did go ahead and add the centers the same way as I did for the first one with the slippery when wet. I'm taking a sand eraser to get rid of some of these smudges. You just want to be careful with the sand eraser that you don't add too much pressure. You kind of have to do this a couple of times, but eventually you'll at least lighten those smudges. So here we go. Here's the 3 panels, and we're going to make these into very, very, very simple cards. So I had a few more smudges that I found later on. And for this first one, which is the ink blended one, I'm going to go ahead and die cut. Nope, I lied. First, I went in with a white gel pen to fix up those white outlines between each one of the petals. Some of my coloring may have bled, or maybe I just wasn't all that careful. So just going over those areas with a white gel pen will bring back out that outline that is part of the stencil. So now we can go ahead and do our die cutting. So I used a large stitched rectangle die for this first one here, which is the ink blended panel. And then I'm going to cut a piece of black cardstock. You guys know the deal by now if you've ever watched my videos. It's going to be a little bit larger than my card panel, but still a little bit smaller than my card base so that I have a nice black border and I have a white border. And this will really make a clean and simple card like this really pop off the page. Now for my sentiment, I'm going to use the same sentiment for all 3 cards. It is one of the sentiments from the Posh Poinsettia stamp set, also by Simon Hurley Create. And I am just going to go ahead and stamp that with some VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And I'm going to go right over some of those smudges so that you're never going to know that they were there. So on to the next card. This is the Copic colored card. I'm going to cut this down with a very small stitched rectangle die. And I'm also going to cut a scalloped stitched rectangle die from some black cardstock, which is going to be a little bit larger than my panel. And this, I'm going to pretty much layer them the same way, and it's going to be significantly smaller than the card base. But sometimes with a clean and simple card like this, it's nice to have that really big border. It just kind of makes it look like you have more to the card than you actually do. So same thing for the first one, same thing. I should say same thing as the first one. I'm going to go ahead and stamp out that sentiment with that VersaFine Onyx Black ink, again covering up any smudges that I may have. Finally, for this next one, this is where I actually ink blended through some of the images. So I need to cut these off. So I'm going to make this a landscape card, and I ended up taking a 1/2 inch off of the main panel. Then I'm going to take another piece of white cardstock, and I'm going to cut this 1/4 inch larger than my panel and 1/4 inch smaller than my card base. So it's going to be 5 1/4 by 4. Now, in order to get this to kind of match my card, I wanted to add some ink blending so it looks as if I used colored cardstock. So I'm going to bring out that bee sting ink and go around all 4 sides. I don't have to bring it all the way to the middle because you won't see that, but I'm going with a fairly light hand so it doesn't become too dark and it kind of matches my coloring. Then I can layer everything together, pop this onto an A2 size card, and once again, add my sentiment with that VersaFine Onyx Black ink. So here's a quick look at all 3 cards that we created, 3 different ways to add some shading to a layering stencil set. As always, I will leave the supplies listed in the description box below. Thanks so much for stopping by and have a great day. Bye.